So, good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I am extremely happy to be hosting my dear friend and colleague, Ken Greenberg, this afternoon. Professor Greenberg is a distinguished professor of history at Suffolk University. He's one of the country's leading authorities on the antebellum South and the culture of the antebellum South. He's writing a book that maybe he'll tell us about on the Nat Turner Rebellion. Ken has written important books around the culture of the antebellum South, and has also produced a really cool PBS movie on the Nat Turner Rebellion, which you can check out. He has the best titled book ever in the history of books, which I'm going to read you. It's called Honor and Slavery: Lies, Duels, Noses, Masks, Dressing as a Woman, Gifts, Strangers, Humanitarianism, Death, Slave Rebellions, the Pro-Slavery Argument, Baseball, Hunting, and Gambling in the Old South.
By the way, I can't repeat that title, you know.
His new book is just going to be called Book. And so a personal anecdote, Ken was the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences when I got hired at my first job at Suffolk University. And we got talking about the history of the South, and he said, I tried to show off about my work, and then he showed me his book, and I was so taken by the title. Then I started walking away at the end of the interview, at the end of my job interview, with his book, which I assumed was now mine as a gift. And he called me back and said, "I only have one copy." So I said, "Yeah." I called my wife and said, "It was great. There's this really interesting historian who's also the dean, but I don't think I got the job because I tried to take his book away." So anyway. Ken is going to talk to us about how dueling came to an end in the United States, and you're in for a treat. So, Ken.
Great. Thank you all. By the way, before I start, just to know who is in the room, can we quickly go around, since we're a small enough group, and to just, briefly position yourself in the university and your career right now? And would you mind?
I'm Cole Donellan, and I'm a psych major in my 5th year.
Okay.
Should I say anything else? I don't know.
Go ahead, say another sentence. What brought you here?
My social and political philosophy class, Professor Landy.
Okay. Yeah.
Dan Feldman, I'm a fellow at the Center for Applied Ethics in the Philosophy Department.
Mir, I'm a teacher in the philosophy department and the director of the Center for Applied Ethics.
My name is Whitney. I'm a major. Graduate teacher at philosophy.
Hi, I'm Brendan, and I'm a philosophy major, and I'm a senior graduating from.
I'm Sarah. I'm a sophomore, and I'm an international business major. Right here at Textile.
I'm Chris Zern. I teach in the philosophy department too, and I do social and political philosophy.
And I'm Jake Burley, and I'm a philosophy major undergraduate at the university, and I'm here because I'm interested in the Applied Ethics Center.
Great. Okay, so I think I'm going to be a little less formal than I had planned to be. I assume there'd be a group of 3,000 people coming to see me, but the numbers are lower. Hi, we all introduced ourselves briefly. Just say where you position yourself in the university. Where are you? Are you a student?
Yes, my
What?
name is Mahiran Kulibali, and I'm a philosophy student.
Good. Okay. So my topic today is the question of dueling and why the dueling ended. And I realized as I was developing these ideas that it's silly to talk about where it ended, because most people in our culture don't know what dueling really is. If your knowledge of dueling comes from films you've seen, for example, if you haven't studied it in any depth, often it's misunderstood what it's all about. And then I realized that in describing, first I have to describe for you what it is exactly, and it'll be full of surprises. And then in the act of describing it, it'll come alive that you're in a kind of a culture and a world which is no longer exists. Because your reactions to this, you probably, it's been so remote from most people's consciousness and experience that your reaction might be, well, this is some crazy, strange, long dead world. But of course, if you're going to ask the question of, why it ended because our world was coming into existence, the world where dueling just doesn't make any sense. So what I want to do is approach the topic of the end of the duel with, the life of the duel when it's going on actually, and explain that as much as I can, and then say some things about how it ends. So I think the best way to talk about it is to talk about specific examples of what they did. And I'm talking about roughly the period from in the United States, the American Revolution through the Civil War. That's the heyday of dueling in the United States. And it's going on in Western Europe as well. And there are many other cultures that have had, fights to the death, basically, that are similar to the duels. But my focus is on the United States. And the question that, I studied the duel in action, and then I began to ask myself, so why did it end when it did? And it roughly ended with the Civil War. Now, again, there are some individual duels that go on after the Civil War, but it doesn't fit the culture by and large anymore. So the question is, well, how'd that happen exactly? But actually, there's another question behind it too, which is, so when people change their moral ideas about what's right and wrong, well, how does that happen exactly? Why is it that, we do something as humans up to a certain point, and then all of a sudden, it's gone? How does that happen exactly? You can ask that about many moral issues. How you could take it today, for example, the treatment of animals. It's sort of a live issue, and it's in flux. But you could ask the same type of question about that. So,
Ken, I should have told you that when I circulated the notice about your talk, one of my colleagues, and it was like, how did dueling end in America? And one of my colleagues wrote back, maybe it's time to bring it back.
actually, that's not an uncommon idea. After I'm done talking, we can discuss that. So I think the best way to get into this is for me to tell you about an incident, and I'll tell you about a few incidents so you get to know what it feels like to be involved with dueling. This is an incident that happened in South Carolina College in 1833. And I'm talking about white men. The topic becomes much more complex if we begin to talk about the people who were enslaved, how they relate to these issues of dueling and honor and so forth, how women relate to it as well. But here my focus is going to be on the central group of people who actually exchange shots with each other. So this is something that happened in 1833 in South Carolina College. The custom was that students would eat together at communal tables, and probably a table like this, right? And someone would bring a communal dish to the table, and they'd put it down, and people would pass around the dish and serve themselves. And so somebody brought a dish of trout to one of these tables, and the custom was, well, you'll grab the dish of trout and you'll serve yourself, and then you can pass it around from there. Well, what happened in this case was that two students on opposite sides of the table grabbed the dish of trout at the same moment. Now, neither one lets go. The table gets hushed. Everybody knows. They're not playing here. This is serious stuff. People's lives are about to be threatened by this kind of activity. Neither one will let go. Finally, one of them lets go and says, "I will see you later." Everybody knows what's going on here. This is, a dangerous moment that has occurred, and that continues from there. Now, what happens is, in order to have a duel, you need to have seconds. The job of the second is to, well, first of all, to prevent the duel from happening. the second, I don't know, we don't know what the second did in this case, but all duels have to have seconds. There are several things the seconds do. The first thing is each party has a second, and the principals, the ones who have involved in an exchange of insults, they step back. It's the seconds who begin to communicate. And the job of the second is to prevent the duel. Usually you can come up with some reason. You can say, well, would you apologize? Or would you say something which will alleviate the concern of the other person? And they try to do that kind of thing. In some cases that can be worked out. In this case, it couldn't be worked out. So then the question is, who are the seconds? And this is where it begins to get really interesting. They're professors. Imagine this. Now, everybody knows this could lead to death, right? Now, if this happened at your university, and you ask some professor, would you be my second? You would say, get out of here, We're going to expel you from the university. You can't do that kind of a thing. But it made perfect sense. So when they each approached the professors who probably know the family of these students or there's some connection, they both agree to be seconds. And then the seconds also are supposed to work out the terms of the duel. The distance that they're going to stand, whether the doctors, they have to arrange to get a doctor on the scene, and also the kind of weapons that will be used. Mostly for these people in the United States in the mid-19th century, it's pistols. And they're typically dueling pistols are inaccurate. And part of that is, no one rushes to get a really accurate pistol because they don't want deaths to coming out of this. In fact, I once studied this and discovered that it's actually, given the fact that it's two people shooting at each other with pistols, there are actually a small number of deaths result, small given that fact, okay? So it might be 17% is what I got, of the people who actually exchange shots. Now, mostly, they never get to the exchange of shots. They find ways to not get involved in the duel in the end. But it's a small number. But nonetheless, it's the second's job is to determine that. Occasionally there are odd things. Someone will say, I want to use sabers or rifles. There's one famous case where the seconds agree to having people shoot at each other with rifles. But in general, it's pistols that they're going to shoot at each other with. So they arrange that, and in this case, they end up going to the dueling field, and they shoot at each other, and one person is killed, and the other one is maimed for life as a result of this exchange of shots. Now, as soon as I tell you this story, you would say, what? What are they doing? Why are they doing that? Why would anybody do such a thing? If it happened today, you would immediately say, call the police to stop it. Interesting thing, okay? Is it illegal what they're doing? And the answer is yes, it's illegal. There are laws against dueling. Actually, even without the laws against dueling, there's common laws. You just can't go around shooting your guns at people, right? So it's illegal. Not only that, but if you're a Christian, what happened to turning the other cheek and that kind of a thing? That too is pushed aside. In fact, what I've discovered is in studying the duel is that the people who engage in the duel, not only do they know it's illegal, but they can't justify it. They say, look, I hate dueling. Typically, they'll say, if they speak about this, they say, there's no pro-dueling argument, or it's rare. Even the things that pass for pro-dueling arguments, there are a few, like rules of dueling kind of thing. If you've seen the Hamilton, the production Hamilton, has anybody seen that or know the music? Right, there's a song about the
10 Duel Commandments.
The 10 Duel Commandments, right. And that's pretty accurate. And that's taken from an actual list of the rules of dueling. And sometimes when you have one of these pamphlets that will talk about the rules of dueling, someone who writes it says something about dueling, right? And almost always, this is the most famous one, written in 1838 by a guy who was the governor of South Carolina. And he says, dueling's a terrible thing. I wish we didn't have it. In other words, you can really, if you try to search for pro-dueling arguments, it's usually couched in the form of, we'll do dueling, it's a necessary thing, but it's a necessary evil. No one ever says it's a positive good to have dueling in the world. So that's the context in which they're operating, and this is the context in which they've then shot each other. Because it's illegal, by the way, there are famous dueling grounds. Has anybody ever visited a dueling ground? You have? Oh, where?
New Hampshire
Really?
and somewhere in Western Mass.
Wait, 2 dueling grounds?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great.
It's my memory's a little foggy. but
Yeah.
I definitely went to one in like Western Mass, and then I'm pretty sure my uncle took me to one in New Hampshire.
That's interesting.
It was
Do
super
you-
random. It's like
yeah.
I never thought I'd ever be brought up again.
Do you have any memory of it or any observation from it?
It was when I was middle school or like early high school. But
Yeah.
I remember they also did like a reenactment,
Ah,
or like right by the dueling grounds. I don't know if they could be on it, but it was really cool. It was interesting to watch.
yeah, fascinating. Well, you know, typically, because dueling is illegal, they try to duel in places where there's enough ambiguity in who has jurisdiction, that, because no one wants to see the people who engage in dueling arrested. These people have generally very high status in the society, and therefore, the way you could avoid an arrest, one of the ways is dueling grounds are often on a border between 2 towns or often between 2 states, you know, and you know, even the Hamilton duel, you know, they do it in New Jersey, not New York. But typically, the dueling ground itself will be one person will stand in one state, one person will stand in the other, and then who's going to do the prosecution, right? It's enough ambiguity, and everybody is looking for the ambiguity. There are very few people who duel who ever get prosecuted. It's very, very common. Okay, so that's the structure of duel. You have any questions about what I've said so far about this part of things?
So the pistols used for, you made this motion when you're talking about the pistols used, or you're talking about rifling?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they like left out rifling on purpose for
Yeah,
different pistols?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's causing death isn't the purpose of it. And in fact, dueling is often missed, the heart of dueling is often missed this way, because you would think of, if you've seen it reenacted or if you see it in a film, it's often portrayed as one person wants to kill the other. But actually, given what I've said already about dueling, it's that no one wants to see anybody die. The purpose of a duel, the central purpose of a duel, is to be shot at. That's why people engage in dueling, not to kill somebody.
Just like the
Yeah.
culmination of like their disagreement like comes to an end, because that's like the finality of like shooting at each other.
That's right. Now, the question is, what is there about that, okay? Because why are they involved in duel? Why didn't someone just say, well, you take the dish of trout, right? You know, when you look at it, it's not that, the disagreements that lead to duels are rarely about something that's significant, right? And we're talking about one guy didn't let his hand go from the dish of trout, right? What's that about? Why would you get shot at by someone or shoot someone who doesn't let go of the dish of trout? Was that a thing to die for? Is that, you know, your family hears about this and they're going to say he was a real man of honor, you know, because he wouldn't give up that dish of trout, right? You wonder what really is going on there. So what really is going on there is that it's about who is master and who is slave. And in the South, those terms mean something very significant, right? So it's about mastery. What happens is someone who's insulted has their status cast in doubt. And what you've got to do is, you want to think of yourselves as equals. These white gentlemen thought of themselves as equals among themselves, and you only duel with someone who was your social equal. That's why, for example, think about this, okay? Imagine if you're an enslaved person for a second, and you live on the farm of someone who's one of these people who has the values of somebody who duels. And suppose an enslaved person, grabs the dish of trout or does the equivalent, right? Says something like, you're a liar. That's the kind of fighting words that can usually, it's some version of, I consider you a liar. So if you're an enslaved person and you say to a master, "You're a liar," right? Well, what happens then? Does the master say, "Oh, those are fighting words, let's duel"? And of course, if you're an enslaved person, say, "Give me a gun," and I'm with you all the way, right? Dueling is a privilege, right? And the person who's the master won't, it's a sign that you're equal to the person you're dueling with. That's the assumption, right? And the ultimate demonstration of equality is each person on either side of the duel is willing to die. And they're willing to die because they've been insulted. So there's been some slight to their position in the society, and they're worried about that. And if they stand and face each other and get shot at, then that will reassert their equality once again. It's getting shot at. What's the getting shot at? It means you're willing to die. If your reputation is smeared, you're willing to die for that. That's what makes you equal to the person you're shooting against. Getting shot or not, it doesn't matter who gets shot, who doesn't get shot. I mean, obviously it matters to some people, okay? But that's not the point of what they're engaged in there. What they're engaged in is it's a conversation about equality. And in a society full of people who they've enslaved, they know what equality is all about. Therefore, one of the characteristics in a society full of enslaved people and masters is that there's no dueling between masters and enslaved people. What a master would do, well, what would a master do? Suppose an enslaved person calls a master a liar. What does the master do?
Punish them.
Yeah, whip him, right? That's a usual kind of punishment, okay? That's the thing. And if the enslaved person says, "Hey, wait, I want to duel," then the answer is, "No, you're not of the social class in which I recognize you as someone I duel with."
So what, understanding that the point of the duel is just to be shot at, obviously there's an underlying disagreement or issue behind that, which assumably isn't resolved by just being shot at. If someone calls you a liar, they can walk away from the duel still thinking you're a liar, or is that not the subject?
Actually, you're thinking like someone who's opposed to the duel. In fact, let me find it now. I've got a great quote. It's from Benjamin Franklin. This is about 3 hours into my talk, so. Here. Benjamin Franklin, who was not a fan of the duel, by the way. Here's the way he analyzes it. He says, this is an anecdote showing how silly the duel is. He says, a Frenchman was sitting in a cafe, and he turns to a stranger and says, "You smell." The stranger replies, "This is an affront. You must fight me." The Frenchman replies, "I will fight you if you insist on it, but I do not see how that will mend the matter. For if you kill me, I shall smell too. And if I kill you, you would smell, if possible, worse than you do at present." And that's the logic. You see, you can knock down the logic of the duel with that, right? I mean, that's why it doesn't make any sense to us, okay? It seems to, and you're asking that question, right? It seems to miss the point. So what does shooting at each other have to do with it exactly? Yeah.
Well, I think it's that their reputation is brought back up by the fact that they were willing to sacrifice their life for their beliefs. And like, even if like there was nobody won the duel, like they still like go out of the duel like with their pride intact because.
Well, I think you're right to know that they're accomplishing something by shooting at each other, but it's not getting rid of the smell. That's the point is, what you fight a duel about isn't the thing. It's not about the dish of trout, right? Something bigger is going on. And what's the bigger thing that's going on? One person is at that moment asserting, "I am the master, and you are my subordinate." That's what's happening. And in a society where that means a great deal, then that's why they're willing to engage in that activity. You know, what is it, New Hampshire license plate? You know what's on the New Hampshire license plate?
Free or die.
Live free or die, okay? So it's the willingness, or give me liberty or give me death, the famous Patrick Henry, if he said it, slogan, right? Give me liberty or give me death. It's the willingness to die. And in fact, there's a myth, which you can see this everywhere among people who owned other people, but there's a myth which says that, well, I could never be enslaved. This is what masters told themselves in different forms. I could never be enslaved. They looked at the people who were enslaved all around them and they said, can't happen to me. Why? Because I would rather die than be a subordinate. So therefore, when the masters looked around and they saw people they enslaved, they said, oh, there's somehow, they chose this. If they, that's why they're enslaved, because they chose it. If they really didn't want to be enslaved, they would be willing to die. They'd be willing to stand up and fight. That's why the rebellions of enslaved people, where people who do rise up, and like Nat Turner, for example, and challenge the master class, that is one of the central ways to challenge to challenge the institution of slavery. And actually, the usual forms, which I'm sure you all know about, right? How would an enslaved person typically resist in slavery?
Run away.
Running away is one common thing. How else? Yeah.
Or actually, never mind.
Other ways? Yeah.
Was the Haitian Revolution gaining weaponry to fight back?
That's part, I think, of actually using violence and willing to risk your life, right? It's using force, right? Okay. But there are many more ways. You know, if you were in this position, just put yourself in there for a
Not doing
second.
the tasks.
What's that?
Undermining
Yeah.
the tasks,
Yeah.
not doing the tasks.
Yeah, slow down the work.
Slow down the work.
Right? They want you to work, you slow it down. Or, and masters report this all the time, they say, you know, the people who I own are really lazy. Now, this is one of the stereotypes, right? And they're lazy, well, that's a form of resistance probably. Why would you work fast? No matter how hard you worked, right? You get the same pay, which is nothing. So why would you work really hard? Okay? So now what is in the mind of the enslaved person, they're resisting enslavement. In the mind of the master, it reconfirms all the stereotypes they have. These people, they choose this, and they don't see the resistance involved in that kind of a thing. Other ways in which you could resist is, you know, marriage is illegal. I mean, it's not a legal institution. So that if you're an enslaved person in the South before the Civil War, there's no legal institution of marriage. People fall in love, that happens, but they're not legally married. Because if you had legal marriage, what marriage is a legal institution, is the two parties have claims on each other. Usually it's property is the heart of the matter of marriage, as well as love, which is sitting there somewhere. But this is the period when actually, you know that love comes in at a certain point. It's not there beforehand. What's that?
It's a business deal.
Yeah, usually that's the case. And you know, you see this in the literature of the 18th and 19th centuries where people get married and love usually has nothing to do with it. And this is reconfirmed in the way the society operated. By the mid-19th century, you have love entering the picture. But anyway, if you were an enslaved person trying to have a relationship with someone and trying to protect yourself against the whims of slavery, which means you could be sold, you could be raped. Do you know that if you're an enslaved person who is raped by a white man, there is no crime? People don't get prosecuted for that. That's not a crime. You could, you know, the master could take the white person who raped their slave to court as a trespass. You've trespassed on my property. They have the right. But the woman who is raped can't go to court. In fact, people who were enslaved can't testify in cases involving whites. If you have 100 people watching a murder, it happens in front of 100 people, and they're all people who are enslaved, all the witnesses. There are no witnesses, because if two whites and they shoot at each other and one kills the other, there's no witness to that murder. You can't go to court if you're an enslaved person. This is important. This is part of the same. You see, in an odd way, what I'm saying too is that the word of an enslaved person isn't to be believed. That's built into the legal structure. So I'm being a little slippery here too, because you see how he's going from somehow that dish of trout episode, which seems to be so simple, there's a lot going on in the dish of trout. A lot of values and ideas and attitudes are embedded in the dispute over the dish of trout. And it comes up over and over and over again. Once you know the code, in other words, if you go back and you try to look, and by the way, any of you can do it. So here's the way I stumbled into it was I realized I was reading newspapers of the South before the Civil War, and every once in a while there'd be this stuff that gets published in the newspaper. And it's not news, by the way. It's not, this is before the Civil War. There really isn't a professional reporting group. There aren't news people going out in the field to report on incidents and so forth and so on. What happens is usually the people involved in the duel or the seconds involved in the duel will want to report in the newspaper a description of the duel. Or they might print the exchange of letters. One person says, here's why I feel insulted and so forth. And then when they finally end up shooting at each other, there'll be a reconciliation, and they'll often publish that reconciliation as well. So you can go back and look at Southern newspapers, pour through them, and you stumble across these things, and you have to ask yourself, what is this all about exactly? What it's all about is that since it's all about reputation, that's what dueling is all about. It's not about the dish of trout. It's about your reputation. Everybody at the table who witnesses that scene, right, is saying, well, who's masterful and who is like an enslaved person? That's what they're all watching for. Neither one can let go. They know they're down a road here which they don't like to be down that road, but that's the road they're down. And if they let go without the next step of fighting a duel, then they've admitted that they're the subordinate one. They can't stand that. So therefore, they can't let go, basically. And then they want the public to know. Now, sometimes, it's enough the people you're sitting with at the South Carolina College, but usually it's a larger group that you want to know about this. And both parties will agree to publish this stuff. And you can see there are hundreds of these floating around there. And they never make sense. Why would you risk your life for that dish of trout? Why are you risking your life? Because it's not about the dish of trout. It's about subordination and mastery. All right. Questions or comments?
There's some literature around the idea that there are societies that are honor societies and others that are guilt or rule-based societies.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's this kind of liminal space in the South between the Revolution and the Civil War where you have both going on.
You have just asked the most complicated question which people have spent their whole lives. So let me elaborate on what you're saying, okay? Because in a way, one way you might characterize it, you might say, well, we're not dueling anymore, right? This is the place where it's ended already, and we don't do that kind of a thing. And then you could look back at the same moment in time, right? There are some cultures in the world where honor and honor killing, for example, is still around, and death is still part of it, and you can sort of see the same values operating with variations, okay? So one way to think about it is, well, they're a certain type of society and we're a different type of society. But when you poke away at that, and when you came up with the liminal idea is interesting too, when you poke away at that, what you discover is that, well, it's not all one way or the other. For example, even in our own society, when you say that this kind of activity of dueling doesn't exist, is that really true? Weren't you 13 years old once? And every 13-year-old, you'll give your life when someone insults you on the schoolyard.
What's road rage?
Yeah, road rage is another example of that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, and then because cultures today that have things like honor killings and so forth. So so what happened is, yeah.
Honor killings are actually, they're not for the purpose of being shot at without result.
No, you're right. It's a different variation. Yeah.
They want them to succeed and they do succeed.
Yeah.
It's not, they're less ceremonial in some way.
Yeah, but what unites the two is honor. It's about reputation.
Right.
That's what's going on, right, in all these cases. So there are certain kinds of activities with reputations at stake, and when that is the case, then death can enter the picture because it's your way of saving your reputation. The honor killing, basically, someone loses their life to preserve the honor, not their honor, but the honor of someone else who does the killing. But that's the way the honor works. So then the comment about this is a liminal space, so the South before the Civil War, people who have studied honor in the South have said, well, the South is an honor culture. At least the white South, the master class, is an honor culture with the values that are all implied with what I've said, right? But yet you also mentioned the kicker in this was, well, are they? Are they really an honor culture? Are they really so different? And you could find plenty of Southerners. For example, white Southerners before the Civil War, there are many Christians who believe in the values of Christianity. And if you think about what honor is, it's an inversion of Christianity, right? Or at least a version of Christianity. It's an inversion, right? It's not about turning the other cheek. It seems to be the exact opposite of that kind of a thing. That's the case. And then if you look at the North, okay, we used to believe, when I say we used to, I mean historians who wrote about this topic before 20 years ago or so, it was very common to think about it as the North was the place which didn't have honor, that it wasn't a society full of enslaved people, it was somehow different. Now, what's happened is there's a lot of literature about the South in the last 20 years which says, well, that's a little too simple. And let me give you the complexities which people have pointed out. If you're a master of a plantation and you want to borrow money, who's got the money you can borrow from? Banks. And often banks, the main places are in the North, and they turn to the North. There are some Southern banks as well, but often they get a lot of their money from the North as well. So they get loans from banks, right? What happens if you go bankrupt? If you're a master of a plantation and you've borrowed money from a bank, a northern bank, and they don't have slavery in the North, right? You go bankrupt. What happens to the people you've enslaved?
The bank sells them off.
The bank owns them. Yeah. Now, they may want to get rid of them, or they may not. They could own them still. So it used to be, we thought, well, the South, they're the ones who enslaved people. And now we know enough to know, there are a lot of Northerners involved in that business. Insurance is another one, too, right? I mean, if you're going to look to the people who you can buy insurance from, and they insure people who are enslaved. If a master owns a human being, they have value, and you're worried about losing your money, you try to find someone who can insure it, so they're involved in it as well. Or another larger way to look at it is the New England textile industry, right? Go to Lowell. This is the place where American industrialization began, in a sense, where they have those great factories and machines and people are working there. Those are the early days of industrialization. Well, you know what makes that possible? The labor of enslaved people. Because where does the cotton come from? It comes from the South. You wouldn't have those factories unless the South is involved. So therefore, there's this odd thing, whereas it's easy to say, oh, they're different in the South and the North, the two different cultures, different societies, and yet we also discover the overlap. Now, in the case of dueling, we do know this. There's actually a woman named Joanne Freeman who wrote 2 books about this subject. But she said, so who's dueling? When are they, in fact, dueling before the Civil War? And what she's discovered is that if you just focus on politics in Washington, D.C. even, okay, there are people dueling all the time. And by the way, this is beyond belief. Your idea of what American politics is like, it's pretty nasty nowadays, right? Okay? Well, it was at least as nasty before the Civil War. And people would challenge each other to a duel. Now, you can go back, say you picked up a copy of the Congressional Record, and you began to thumb through the Congressional Record, and you come across the following exchange. And by the way, there are historians who have looked at this stuff, and they thought it was trivial, they didn't know what to make of it exactly. But in the Congressional Record, it says, somebody stands up and says, if the senator from so-and-so said this, this, and this, then that's a lie. Now, you just read it so it sits dead on the page, okay? But everybody in that Senate chamber knows that that statement could lead to death. They all know the rules. Northerners, Southerners, no matter where you're from, you've heard this kind of thing before. And then there's a moment when you say that, because being called a liar is the most common reason for having to fight a duel. It means that the way you present yourself isn't the way you really are. And therefore, you being called a liar gets at the heart, really, of what it means to be a free person, an independent person. Is, your word can't be trusted. You're dishonored, in a sense, when someone doesn't trust your word. You lose face when that happens, okay? So when you read in the Congressional Record, as happens hundreds of times, and someone says to somebody else, if you said this, this, and this, then you're a liar. Now then everybody's on alert, and then you go down a road, right? Before you even call seconds, before you challenge each other to a duel, you might say something like, and you can read in the record, this kind of exchange happens all the time, you might say something like, well, here's what I did say. And it's not exactly word for word what they accused you of saying and so forth. And in that is a lot of wiggle room, okay? And most duel-like encounters, which if you're a man in politics, this happens. During the course of your life, it'll happen scores of times, basically. But if you say, oh, I actually said this, and then usually they'll figure out a way to get around it somehow. 95% of the time, that's what's going to happen. There won't be a duel. But the duel hovers in the background. It makes sense of the whole thing. So anyway, what I was saying was that this was not just a Southern institution, it was also Northern. Now, in my own research, I've decided that it really is more Southern than Northern, but nonetheless, it's not exclusively Southern. And you can't just say that they were one way, and so forth. And if the South was liminal in the sense that it's got a lot of different things going on at once. There are people who object to the values of honor and dueling. They're there as well. And it happens in the North, too. I think it happens more in the South. In fact, that's what I'm writing about now, which is why I'm writing about why the duel ended. And the duel ended with a civil war. It's not a coincidence. Slavery ends, and slavery is such a big, given what I've said about the nature of the meaning of that kind of activity, of dueling, the end of slavery is going to destroy the underpinnings. There's one thing you need. If you're going to have a culture that's based on the idea of honor that's behind the duel, you have to have a culture which has the honored, those who are honorable, and the dishonored. And Southerners living in a society where they've enslaved people have that built in. The people who were enslaved are the dishonored. The people who were the masters are the honored. And they're very sensitive about that. And that's the driver behind actually what's going on in the South. It's just not, human beings drip over in different ways, and it's not a clear line between the two. But having studied this for quite a while, I can tell you there is a line there. You don't want to ignore it totally. You have any other question or comment? Let me take you down another road too, because I discovered something really interesting about the South. I want to describe for you something I stumbled across while writing about honor and slavery. So I came across an activity which happens in the South between two gentlemen involving the pulling of noses. The tweaking of a nose twinking. You ever hear that kind of a thing? Okay, so when I first came across this, there was actually an incident that happened in Virginia. And what happened was, two gentlemen were going down the road, which would normally lead to a duel. But you only duel with a social equal. And therefore, if you believe the person you're involved with here isn't a social equal, it's a compliment to challenge them to a duel. Remember, that's why masters don't get involved with duels with the people they've enslaved. That would be complimentary to the enslaved person. That would be an admission of their equality. So they don't do that, okay? But what if you came across a white person who thinks they're a gentleman, who aspires to be part of the group of gentlemen, but you don't think that they belong in that group, okay? What's your alternative? You don't challenge them to a duel. You have a few things you can do, and one of them is to pull their nose. Now, it doesn't actually have to be a literal pulling, right? Sometimes you could, and we have people saying this kind of a thing, I just want to touch your nose. And that would be the sign that you don't regard them as your social equal if they touch the nose. So I came across this incident, and it involved a nose pulling, but they didn't call it a nose pulling. And this is an amazing thing. I know this, and a handful of people who read my book know this as well, but now you will all know this as well. So they didn't call it a nose pulling, they called it a Lieutenant Randolph outrage. A Lieutenant Randolph outrage. So I figured, who the hell was Lieutenant Randolph, you know? And how can I find, I asked all my historian friends, have you ever heard of Lieutenant Randolph? And why are they calling this because I know it's a nose pulling, since that's how I approached the whole thing. Why do they refer to it as Lieutenant Randolph outrage? And I said to myself, you know what I'm going to do? This happened in Virginia. I'm going to go back and read every issue of the newspaper, going back as many years as I can read them, to see whether there's a reference to Lieutenant Randolph and the outrage. Oh, man. So I go there, and there's a lot of reading in the library. I'm bleary-eyed, right? There's no Lieutenant Randolph. I go back a year, I go back 2 years, and then all of a sudden, I come across Lieutenant Randolph and the outrage. And the amazing thing is that there are other historians who have looked at this, and they had no idea what they were looking at. Because I approached it knowing that it's a nose pulling, right? I said, oh, this is what's going on here. Because it's described as, well, let me just describe what it was. Andrew Jackson, who had the greatest nose of his era. You know, he was a guy who was really into dueling and believed in all the values of dueling, and he was president of the United States, okay? He himself fought duels when he was younger, and so this incident that I discovered involves Andrew Jackson as president of the United States. And what happens is there's someone who's in the Navy, who's from Virginia, who's the purser on a boat. He's the person who handles the finances on a boat. And he's accused of embezzling money. And he is kicked out of the Navy as a result of that. The person who signs that order kicking him out of the Navy is Andrew Jackson, who's president of the United States. And this guy says, I didn't do this, and I am deeply insulted, and I got to, let people know that this is not tolerable. And therefore, what he does is he can't challenge Jackson to a duel. Jackson's going to say, President, he's 66 years old when this happens, right? And you're going to challenge him to a duel, and you're a naval officer, actually. So that's not a possibility. So what Lieutenant Randolph decides to do is to show his contempt for Jackson by pulling his nose. So, this was at a time when there isn't modern security for presidents of the United States, right? He's on a boat. He's actually traveling upriver. He's in Alexandria, Virginia, and there's some ceremony for the mother of George Washington that he's on his way to, and the boat stops in Alexandria, Virginia, and Lieutenant Randolph just gets on the boat, walks into a cabin where Jackson is seated, and he has his aides around him, and he goes up to Jackson. Jackson has no idea who this guy is, right? And the guy goes up to him and pulls his nose. Now, I know this and you know this, but I can tell you, if you read about it in the papers at the time, you would have no idea what just went on. The way the newspapers describe it is he thrust his hand into Jackson's face. What the hell's that? I mean, that's unbelievable. What is going on there? But coming at it the way I did, I knew just what was happening. And Jackson then stands up, and this is described in the newspapers. He stands up and he grabs his cane and he starts to chase after this guy, who then quickly leaves. And one of his aides says, "Sir, shall I kill him for you?" And Jackson says, "I take care of these matters myself." He's the president of the United States, right? And he's going to go out and kill this guy because of what he just did. So the guy leaves. Now, I also came across another amazing example. Peggy O'Neil was a woman who, it's a complicated story, but she was friendly with Jackson because of her husband, because of her life in Washington. She was a social light as well. And she remained friendly with Jackson after he was president of the United States. And Peggy O'Neil actually wrote in her life story, basically, I used to, whenever I wanted to annoy Jackson, I would say, "Mr. President, you should never have let anybody pull your nose." She's the only person who ever said that, okay? And Jackson, she said, he always reacted the same way. He would stand up and grab his cane and says, "Madam, nobody ever pulled my nose." He was furious. It was a terrible, terrible thing for him to do. So that's within the culture of dueling, in a sense. It's got all the values of dueling. Now the question is, what's with the nose, right? Why the nose, okay? You read about this stuff and you don't even realize its significance. The nose, if you pay attention to the nose in literature, okay, it's all around you. Pinocchio. Why does his nose grow bigger when he lies? That's echoing this kind of a conversation. Cyrano de Bergerac, you ever read Cyrano de Bergerac? That's French, but it's nonetheless, his most prominent feature, he's a man of honor, right? And his most prominent feature is his nose. He has an enormously long nose. There's a modern movie made based on that with Steve Martin. Roxanne, that's right. You should see it. And he's got the same thing, right? His honor is in his nose, okay? And you use the phrase saving face, right? When you've been humiliated or dishonored, you talk about the need to save face.
It's
Yeah.
connected to like the Jewish stereotype of having a big nose.
I'm not sure, actually. I guess so, yeah. Because you see, in the same way that what I'm describing, when I describe these people and their focus on the nose, you see this in the culture which believes in these ideas. They do talk about skin color is very important to them, right? They see the color of the people they've enslaved as a symbol of their degradation. Now, if you came across the argument and you would say something like, well, beauty is only skin deep, what's the sense of that? What sense does it make to worry about that? And their answer would be, no. Honor is about what's on the surface. It's not about, for a man of honor, the nose is the most important part of the body, not the penis. We read back post-Freudian ideas into a pre-Freudian world, basically. So he understands what that's all about. But the nose, I think for Freud, the nose, to the extent people are interested in noses, it's the extension of the penis to the face, basically, and maybe that's what it is psychologically. But nonetheless, the nose is a symbol of your honor. It's where you, and then once you clue it into the code, you can go back and read, and you can see there's lots of references in the South to noses. That's really, really important. Here's another example too. If you're an enslaved person and you have scars on your back because you've been whipped, okay? If someone wants to read your back, if you read the novel Beloved, the lead character in Beloved by Toni Morrison has scars on her back, okay? But if you read that novel, she reads it as the scars on the back of the main character, I think it's Sethi, represent the brutality of the master. But if you're a master of enslaved people in the South and you accept the values I'm talking about, and you look at the back of an enslaved person and it's full of scars because they've been whipped, that's a sign of the rebelliousness and degradation of the person who's enslaved, not of the master. We go back, we read backs differently now. When we're outside that culture of honor, we read the back differently. So in an odd way, you know, when I began to do this work, I began to see that I was engaged in a kind of an active translation. They're speaking a language, which if you go back as a historian and try to understand what they're saying, even though they're speaking English, you're actually missing what they're saying. That's why almost everybody, until recently, who's written about things like duels, ends up saying, boy, they were quaint in those days and crazy and silly, and luckily we outgrew that, okay? And they missed the whole point of what they were involved in. What had to change for the duel to end, what had to change was that the culture had to change in a million different ways that were all connected to each other. That's what's going on. Another feature of the master class related to honor in the South was gifts. And this is, and again, if you ever gave this any thought, this is one of the most amazing things about the Old South. Masters, you ever hear the phrase reference to Southern hospitality? White Southerners thought they were the most hospitable people on earth, right? Here are the people engaged in one of the most brutal acts of exploitation that humans have ever engaged in, and their vision of themselves is, we are really generous people. How the hell did that happen? Okay, what's that all about exactly? Well, the logic of slavery is that that an enslaved person owns nothing. And legally, that's the case, right? So therefore, if you live on a plantation, by the way, do I need to watch the time? What time is it? 3. So I have 3 more hours. Yeah, okay, so let me just finish this set of thoughts then. The logic of enslavement is you have nothing, right? Therefore, it may be, you know, you ever hear the stories, and these happen, that masters will allow enslaved people to buy themselves, okay? Well, in the master's mind, it's not as if the enslaved person has bought themselves, because whatever money the enslaved person has belongs to the master. You can't legally acquire property if you're an enslaved person, right? And therefore, allowing somebody to buy themselves is a testament to the generosity of the master, in the minds of the master. There's no way out of it, right? If you got nothing, how do you get out of enslavement? And that's why when masters free the people they've enslaved, you know, for whatever reason, it's always the result of the generosity of the master. They all go back to the generosity of the master. It's part of the same cultural values. So, I guess I'd like to save time for comments and questions. I could go on and on and on, and I could focus more directly on, well, how does it end exactly? And I'll sum it up by saying that the society had to change. It wasn't just a question of someone saying dueling is a stupid thing or a bad thing. The arguments against dueling are all there beforehand. It's, well, I won't go down that road. But anyway, they're all there. What happens is when the culture changed, then the meanings changed along with it. You know, I asked myself one of the things in that long title, one of the things I talked about was baseball. I'm about to stop and let you talk, but why didn't, I knew enough as soon as I came across this to know that, ask yourself, who invented baseball in America? It's complicated because it involves England and so forth, but it is, the American institution is created here, okay? And I say, so the games people invent tells you a lot about those people, right? And what kind of, and then I said to myself, masters didn't invent baseball. It just doesn't fit, right? You know that intuitively. I'll explain to you why they didn't invent it. What sports do masters like? Hunting, horseback riding, you know, racing on racetracks and so forth. But hunting is a classic example, okay? The thing about baseball is it's a middle-class game invented in New England and in New York State almost simultaneously, okay? And it's so connected to the middle class that's developed in those places. Masters, actually I came across a master who after the Civil War sees the people he's once enslaved playing baseball. And he looks at it and says, oh, I want to play too. And he gets in the game. And they let him get up to bat and so forth. And then he hits the ball and someone tags him out. And he says, you know, he didn't know the rules of the game yet. And he says, you mean, they said you got to run to first base. And he says, you got to run in this game? What kind of a stupid game is this? And he throws his bat down. He's not going to play baseball, okay? So what is there about baseball? The heart of baseball is reversals, right? You get up to bat, you bat. If you hit the ball comes back at you, you run from the ball. You know, that's a reversal. Each team has a chance at bat, then it has a chance in the field. It's all about reversals of various sorts. And the masters, when their favorite sport is hunting, while that, if there's ever a reversal when the animal hunts you and kills you, that's a failed hunt, basically. But the most successful hunts are when you go out and you kill an animal. And there's never reversals. It's not part of that game. And, you know, when they look at what baseball is all about, is they're playing a different game. So that's how deep it is, right? If you ask the question of why dueling ended, it's because it's the same people who ended dueling invented baseball. I'll leave you on that high note.
Questions?
Yeah.
Can I take up that thing you said right at the end? Oh, sorry. I just wanted to take up the thing you said right at the end that suggested anyhow that dueling was ended from the outside and not from the inside.
No, actually,
And
because slavery, to the extent that abolition of slavery comes from the outside, in that sense. But it's slavery, I think, is the underpinnings which makes all this make sense.
So that's what I sort of wanted to explore just a little bit more, that as you see it, that slavery in that particular culture is the keystone of a dueling culture. Like you can't have a dueling culture unless you have the slavery, or in this
I
particular
think so.
way.
I hate to generalize too
No,
much,
right. But in this case, that's
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 an
the
important
keystone.
point to keep in mind. But, you know, if we generalized it, I would say that you need a culture which has the honorable and those who are dishonored. That's where it makes sense, this kind of activity. And you get that, you can get that in pockets. You can get it when you're 13 years old and in a schoolyard. You know what that feels like. There are the in-group and the out-group. You got to have a clear in-group and out-group.
I mean, so just to follow up on Chris's points, but institutionally so, and then the argument would suggest that
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
that the more and the wider the institutionalized outgroup, the greater the chance of some set of ceremonies like this to emerge, right? Because the category of being dishonored needs to be prominent in your imagination for an affront to your honor to generate this kind of risk-taking and so on.
Yes. Well, you know, the social death is a word, an expression I should have used. How many of you have heard that expression before? Social death? And usually it refers to the fact that this society has shunned you in some way. You're not considered alive. So one way to think about enslavement is the person who's enslaved is socially dead. That's what's happened in that culture. Now, of course, if you're enslaved, you find ways to give yourself life, and that's what we know a lot more about people who were enslaved, and they're not really socially dead from their point of view, but from the master's point of view, they are. So lacking the ability to insult someone is a sign of the dishonor of the enslaved person. You know, how many of you have read one of the autobiographies of Frederick Douglass? This is one of the great works of American literature, by the way, because he's an enslaved person who leaves slavery and then writes about his life. And it is an amazingly eloquent, extraordinary book. He's an extraordinary man. But in the middle of that, he describes an incident which you now can recognize what this is. He's on a farm where his master gives him to someone else who is known as a slave breaker, because Douglas doesn't want to go along with slavery. And he's beaten every day, over and over and over again. And finally Douglas says he's not going to take it anymore. And he stands up and he fights back. Now, there are other enslaved people watching. The guy who's the slave breaker tries to get them to help him. No one helps him. And at that moment, Douglas is willing to risk his life. Say, I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm willing to die. The end result of that incident, it didn't have to happen this way, but the end result of that incident is, he says, after that confrontation, I felt as if I was free. Not the moment when I ran away, moved to the north, and became legally free, but that moment when I stood up to the slave breaker, that's when I became free. The slave breaker fought and fought and fought, and then just gave up after a while, and then he left him alone after that. But psychologically, that was the key moment for Douglas. It's an extraordinary moment. Now ask yourself, what's going on there? It's a version of the duel. We have an enslaved person fighting the duel and experience it in the way masters experienced it.
I had a question regarding, you had mentioned that the arguments against dueling had been in place long before dueling ended. And it strikes me as a philosopher that might be particularly depressing in that there are a variety of aspects of our current culture for which you can describe ample, strong arguments against, and yet they do not seem to have a practical effect. I think as someone studying philosophy, I think that's always the challenge, is how to make these sorts of arguments against current social issues cash out in some way.
Yeah.
So I'm curious for you to kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, so a good point to focus on, okay? It's one of those interesting things about this sort of situation. The analogy which I have in my head, now first of all, I don't know, you probably know better than anybody, Thomas Kuhn, right? Now, he said many things, most of which have been rejected, okay? But one of the things he talks about is the fact that when he's interested in scientific revolutions. When I'm done explaining this in my awkward, fumbling way, maybe you can help here, okay? So, how do you get from the situation for, what happens from about 14th century on, where, you move and you have a different view of the universe, okay? How does that happen exactly? And he makes a point which is really interesting. He says, the fact that when you looked at the heavens, and the scientists before the Copernican revolution looked at the heavens, they had a different way of describing it than Copernicus did, and those who follow in his wake to have the scientific revolution. The numbers never worked, right? You try to do measurements, and you say to yourself, well, here's what I think is really going on. And you can do measurements, and you can say, therefore, at a certain moment of the year, the stars are going to be aligned this way. And if you try to do that, say with something like as close as the moon, for example, the numbers are always a little off. And that's, in a sense, the same idea, which is that it's not the logic of it. It's off, and the newer system makes it better. You can get more accurate descriptions, but it's still not absolutely definitive. There's still oddities that can't be explained. So as you move from one system of thinking to another system of thinking, it's not, the way to explain it is not that there was some new scientific discovery that did it. Kuhn's brilliant insight, I think, maybe it's not so brilliant, but brilliant insight was that it changed not because of some experiment that changed it, not some logical thing that happened, something else happened. There was a cultural revolution that went on behind the scenes that just made it not make sense to think of it the other way. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but do you have a take on that?
Well, I mean, I think my remembering is a little
Yeah.
slightly different, but it's very similar, which is, you know, that Kuhn's argument was that that a description of the world works for a long time, and the social reality of the scientists is one of building up this worldview. So you start accreting evidence, and you get more and more evidence, and there are things that don't quite work, so you get some evidence that tries to help you explain that, and you elaborate the theory. And then at some point, there are enough of these, there's this burden of discontinuity, of incoherence, and something better comes along. Somebody suggests something. And at that instant, because it's so much simpler and explains so much of the stuff that you can't explain consistently and well with the older system, that's
Yeah.
when the revolution happens. But it's something that takes a long time to happen, that requires the secretion of inconsistencies.
Yeah. So now, the analogy to what you're saying is, I think you're, maybe because you come more from the scientific tradition too, is you're describing something which is more logical than the way I read Kuhn's description of this, okay? My feeling of it is, there's always anomalies, things that don't fit. You know, you've got a theory, you look at the universe, and you try to, you make your theory fit the known facts, and it never fits, okay? Now, Kuhn does describe these anomalies keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the question is, why at some point do you have a scientific revolution where you need to get rid of the old theory and come up with a new one, or the new one develops? What explains that? And I think my reading of what Kuhn did was, he said, you've got to go outside what the scientists are doing. You've got to go into the culture. And there's lots more. There's the religion, there's a change in religion and so forth, there's a change in government, there's a million different things. And that's what I'm describing with the dueling, which is, it made sense because it fits so many things in that world, and then it changes. Now, why it changes is related to the change in the world rather than the change in any particular set of issues.
Can I ask you a different question?
Yeah.
Well, if anybody's interested, it's Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions.
It's a great book, even though I know
it's only this big. It's worth reading.
it's a short book,
Yeah.
but it's fascinating.
So this is not the area you're studying, but it's related, and you know, this is at the risk of taking us way off track, but there was a tradition in German universities of these dueling clubs in the 19th century, and I think,
Yep.
well, into the 20th, in fact.
Mhm.
And the form of that duel was very specific and also highly ritualized, you know, and it was basically the contestants would get on a table like this with their sabers, and the objective was to get an injury, right? And so, you know, in this very constrained space, you would get on the table with a cutlass or a saber or something, and you would go at each other's heads. Basically, the rest of the body was not really the target. And there was a doctor standing by whose job was to sew you up. And then you'd have this tremendous scar on your face because they deliberately sewed you up pretty badly.
Yep.
Right? And so there was this whole culture around having been injured and having stood in the arena, as Theodore Roosevelt would say, right?
Yep.
Been the man in the arena.
Yeah.
So how much does the kind of cultural underpinning that you're talking about translate into?
Yeah.
I know it's not your field, but I'm just curious.
No, I happen to know something about this. So, yeah, what he's describing is this peculiar offshoot, which is clearly connected to the duel, but it's not the duel that I was describing at the same time, okay? So what makes it different is, it's not about risking your life. Now, it may be about the symbol of risking your life. If you get a scar, everybody can look at you and you can say there's a kind of bravery shown by that. But the purpose of getting those scars isn't to actually risk your life. And in fact, what they would do is, the way you get a scar is, sometimes they wear helmets, and the only thing that's showing is your cheeks. And then you sort of hope the other guy is going to whack your cheek and you'll start to bleed from that. The doctor will come along and they'll take a horse hair and put it in the wound and sew up the wound, so you get a raised scar after that. That's a symbol of honor, is what you're wearing, okay? Now, you can get by with symbols in a lot of ways, but at some point someone's going to say, what the hell's that about, you know?
It was, I
Yeah.
mean, these were presumably aristocratic young men.
Yeah, it's the same
Right, so there is
thing.
still this distinction between the,
They're echoing
Yeah.
the traditions of honor, but you can see it as a kind of corrupted form because they're not doing what those guys did before, and they did it in Germany and France and England as well, where you're actually
People
risking
actually-
your life. Yeah, whereas this is different. But you can see the focus on the face, right? You wear your honor on your face. The scar is another way. The nose is another way of wearing the honor.
So, to make a kind of Hobbesian point, so this kind of disappears from, so if I follow the theory or if I follow your hypothesis, as institutional dishonoring fades, the need for something like this also fades. And so the logic of taking a risk for one's honor or being willing to be shot at for one's honor becomes less relevant. Curiously, and this is something we've been talking about, one thing that doesn't fade is on the political level, the chance for getting glory for taking a risk for the political cause is still with us across the board, from ISIS propaganda to alt-right propaganda to Marine Corps videos, right? From all the way back from Pericles to now, the willingness to, die for a cause greater than you is still sort of, at some level or other, the basis for political honor, or what's been called glory. And the reason why it's a Hobbesian point, because for Hobbes, international relations is the sort of paradigm of the state of nature, and where there's no power to keep people in check. It's possible that that kind of structure that slavery was predicated on continues in one way or another, the sort of structure of dishonor in international relations.
This is a good point. It's related to your point too, which is that there could be transmutations of what goes on, right? There is the kind of duels that I was describing, but then there are other things that have symbolic value and representational value which are going on. And you have to read carefully what's really going on there. So it's possible, well, let me ask you this, okay? Is it possible to have a situation where you don't actually risk your life, but you symbolically risk your life? In fact, that's why what was gambling, this is interesting, okay? Gambling in the South before the Civil War, masters loved to gamble. Now, if you go to the North, isn't anybody involved in business a gambler? Isn't that what business is all about? It's gambling. You try to minimize your risk, but so do gambling of a certain type, okay? But what I discovered was the style of gambling which masters loved was the risk of everything, not calculation. They didn't try to calculate, they tried to do it. So therefore, you just say, I'm betting everything on the throw of a dice, okay? Or cards, a one-card game, right? That's the style, everybody admires that. Symbolically, what is the risk of everything is death is the ultimate risk humans take, right? So therefore, they're engaged in an action where you risk everything, which is the equivalent of facing death. And then you could have what I'm describing if you begin to poke away at our culture and you say, well, do we have places where we're doing the same type of thing, where people are risking everything? It's a style. The style that we're used to with business usually is, it's calculation. You try to reduce risk. You want to succeed in business, but then there are some people who want to gamble. The ultimate gamble is the thrill. So they may be engaged in a kind of activity which echoes the culture of honor.
startups.
Yeah.
That's right.
I think we need to let Professor Greenberg go. Thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you. A pleasure. Thanks for coming. A hearty band of followers.